Auntie Toothache, from the Tales of Hans Christian Andersen. Where the story comes from, you want to know that, do you? We got it from the butter cask, the one with the old papers in it. Many a good and rare book has gone to the grocers and the provision dealers, not for reading, but as something that may come in handy. They must have paper to make bags for starch and coffee beans, paper to wrap up bloaters, butter, and cheese. Handwritten documents can also be used. Things often go into the tub that oughtn't to go into the tub. I know a grocer's boy who was the son of a provision dealer. He has risen from the storeroom to the front shop, a young man well up in paper bag literature, whether printed or in manuscript. He has an interesting collection, including several important documents from the waste paper basket of some bewildered, overworked official, secret notes between lady friends, bits of scandal that mustn't go further or be mentioned to a soul. He's a walking salvage store for a large range of literature, and he has a big field to work in, whereas the shops of his parents and of his employer. He has rescued many a book or page of a book that might well deserve a second reading. He has showed me his collection of printed and written things from the tub, chiefly from the grocers. There were a few pages from a biggish exercise book, and the particularly fine, clear handwriting at once caught my attention. "That was written by the student," said the young man, "the student who lived just opposite and died a month ago. He must have suffered a lot from toothache. It's well worth reading. There's only a little bit left here of what he wrote, originally a complete book, and some more besides. My parents gave £half of green soap for it to the student's landlady. Here's what I've managed to rescue." I borrowed it and read it, and now I'll pass it on to you. The title was Auntie Toothache. Chapter 1. My aunt used to give me sweets when I was small. My teeth held out and weren't ruined. Now I'm older and have left school. She still spoils me with sweets and says I'm a poet. There is something of the poet in me, though not enough. Often, as I walk through the streets of the town, I feel as if I was in a large library. The houses are bookcases, every story a shelf with books. Here is a tale of everyday life. There are good old play and scientific works on every subject, and there again reading pleasant and unpleasant. All that literature is for me to dream and philosophize over. Yes, I've got something of the poet in me, but not enough. Lots of people must have just as much as I have, and yet have no badge or title to the name of poet. To them and to me is given a gift from God, a boon big enough for oneself, but far too small to be parceled out again among others. It comes like a ray from the sun, filling mind and soul. It comes like the scent of a flower or a melody one has heard, but cannot remember where. The other evening, as I sat in my room longing to read, but without book or paper to look at, all at once a fresh green leaf dropped down from the lime tree, and a puff of air blew it into me through the window. I was looking at all the branching veins on the leaf, when a little insect crawled across it, just as though it wanted to make a close study of the leaf. That set me thinking about human wisdom. We too crawl about on a leaf, knowing nothing but that, and then proceed to give a lecture on the whole great tree, root, trunk, and summit. The whole great tree, that's to say, God, the world, and immortality, and all we know, the whole thing, is on a little leaf. As I sat there, I had a visit from Auntie Millie. I showed her the leaf with the insect, told her what had come into my mind, and her eyes shone. "You're a poet," she exclaimed. "Perhaps the greatest we have. If I should live to see that, I would go happy to my grave. You have always, ever since Brewer Rasmussen's funeral, astonished me by your tremendous imagination." So said Auntie Millie, and kissed me. Now, who was this Auntie Millie? And who was Brewer Rasmussen? Chapter 2. Mother's aunt was always called Auntie by us children. We had no other name for her. She gave us sugar and jam, although This was very bad for our teeth, but she was weak with the dear children, she said. It was so cruel to deny them the little bit of sweet stuff they were so fond of. And that made us very fond of Auntie. She was an old maid, always old, as far back as I can remember. Her age stood still. In earlier years, she suffered a lot from toothache, and was always talking about it. That's why her friend Brewer Rasmussen called her for a joke, Auntie Toothache. He didn't do any brewing in his later years, but lived on his dividends. He often came to see Auntie and was older than she was. He had no teeth at all, only a few black stumps. As a child, he had eaten too much sugar, he told us children, and that's what happened to your teeth. Auntie can't ever in her childhood have eaten sugar. She had the loveliest white teeth. She saved them, too, said Brewer Rasmussen, by not sleeping with them at night. We children knew that was very naughty of him, but Auntie said he didn't mean anything by it. One morning at breakfast, she told us of a nasty dream that she had had in the night. One of her teeth had fallen out. That means I shall lose a true friend, she said. Was it a false tooth? Asked the brewer with a chuckle. Then it may only mean that you'll lose a false friend. You're a rude old gentleman, said Auntie, more angry than I've ever seen her before or since. But later on, she said that her old friend was only teasing. He was the most generous man on earth, and when he came to die, he would become one of God's little angels in heaven. I puzzled a lot over this transformation and wondered whether I should even be able to recognize him in his new shape. When Auntie was young, and he too was young, he proposed to her. She hesitated too long, was slow in making up her mind, was much too slow in making up her mind, and so she always remained an old maid, yet always a faithful friend. And then Brewer Rasmussen died. He was driven to his grave in the most expensive hearse, and was accompanied by a large number of people in uniform and decorations. Dressed in mourning, Auntie stood at the window with all of us children, except for the little brother that the stork had brought a week before. When the hearse and all the mourners had gone by and the street was empty, Auntie wanted to leave, but I didn't want to. I was waiting for the angel, Brewer Rasmussen, for of course he had now become a little winged child of God and must show up. Auntie, I said, don't you think he'll come now? Or maybe when the stork brings us another little brother, he'll bring us an angel Rasmussen? My imagination quite took Auntie's breath away, and she said, that child will be a great poet. And she kept on saying this all through my school days, even after I was confirmed, right down to my present years as a student. She was and is my most sympathetic friend, both in the throes of writing and the throes of toothache. You see, I have attacks of both. Write down all your thoughts, that's all, she said, and then put them away in a drawer. Jean-Paul did that and became a great writer, who, as a matter of fact, I'm not very fond of. He doesn't thrill. You must thrill, and you will thrill. The night after this conversation, I lay in longing and agony, with a deep desire to become the great writer that Auntie could see in me. I was aching to be a poet, but there is a worse ache than that. Toothache. It smashed me and hashed her. I became a writhing worm with a hot poultice and blistering Spanish beetles. Yes, I know all about that, said Auntie. There was a sad smile about her mouth. Her teeth shone so very white. But here I must begin a new chapter of my aunt's history, and in my own. Chapter 3. I had moved into new lodgings and had been living there for a month. I was chatting with Auntie about this. I'm living, I said, with a quiet family. They don't worry about me, even when I ring 3 times. Otherwise, it's a regular house of din, with all the hubbub of wind and weather and people. My room is right over the entrance. Every cart that comes out or in sets the pictures swinging on the wall. The banging of the gate shakes the house as if there was an earthquake. If I'm lying in bed, the shocks go right through me, though it's all supposed to strengthen the nerves. If it's windy, and it's always windy in this country, then the long window catches outside swing to and fro and knock against the wall. The gate bell to the yard next door peals with every gust of wind. The lodgers in our house come home in driblets late at night, well into the small hours. The lodger immediately above me, who by day gives lessons on the trombone, is the last home, and before he gets into bed he has a little midnight walk up and down with heavy steps and hobnailed boots. There are no double windows, but there is a broken pane which the landlady has stuck paper over. All the same, the wind blows in through the crack and produces a sound like a buzzing hornet. That's my lullaby. When I do at last fall asleep, I am soon woken up by a cock crowing. Both cock and hen announce from the cellarman's chicken house that it will soon be morning. The little Norwegian ponies, which have no stable but are tethered in the cubbyhole under the stairs, kick on the door and skirting as they stretch their legs. The day dawns. The concierge, who sleeps with his family in the attic, goes stamping downstairs. The clogs clatter, the door slams, the house trembles, and when that's all over and done with, the lodger overhead begins to do his morning exercises, lifting with each hand a heavy dumbbell which he cannot hold on to. It keeps falling. Meanwhile, the young people of the house, who are off to school, come rushing, screaming downstairs. I go to the window and open it to get some fresh air, and it is refreshing, as long as I can get it, and the young woman in the back house isn't watching gloves and her chemicals, which is how she gets a living. Otherwise, it's a nice house, and I'm living with a quiet family. Well, that's the account I gave Auntie of the place where I lodged, only I made it livelier, for a description by word of mouth is more vivid than it is in writing. "You're a poet," cried Auntie. "Only write, you talk it down, and you'll be as good as Dickens. In fact, you interest me much more. You paint when you talk. You describe your house so that one sees it and shudders. Go on writing, about something that's alive, about people. Best of all, about unhappy people." As for the house, I really did write it down, with all its din and drawbacks, but only with myself in it. There was no action. That came later. Chapter 4. It was during winter, late in the evening after the theater, with terrible weather, a snowstorm, so that you could hardly get along. Auntie had been at the theater, and I was there to take her home, but it was hard enough to get along yourself, let alone take others with you. The cabs were all engaged. Auntie lived a long way out, whereas my lodgings were close to the theater. But for that, we might have stood sheltering till further notice. We stumbled ahead in the deep snow with the snowflakes whirling around us. I lifted her, I supported her, I pushed her forward. We only fell twice, but we fell softly. We approached my gate, where we shook ourselves. Again, on the steps, we shook ourselves, and even then we took in enough snow with us to cover the floor of the entrance hall. We took off overcoats and undercoats and any other things that could be taken off. The landlady lent Auntie dry stockings and a dressing gown. This was necessary, said the landlady, and added, truly enough, that Auntie couldn't possibly go home that night. She invited her to make shift with her sitting room. She would make up a bed for her on the sofa in front of the permanently locked door into my room, and this was done. The fire was burning in my stove, the tea things were laid on the table, and it was very cozy in the little room, even though hardly as cozy as at Auntie's, where in the winter there are thick curtains on the door, thick curtains on the windows, double carpets on the floor with 3 layers of thick paper underneath. You sit there as if you were in a well-corked bottle with warm air, and yet, as I said just now, it was also very cozy in my room with the wind whistling outside. Auntie talked and talked. Her young days came back to her. The brewer, too, came back, and old memories. She could remember me cutting my first tooth, and how delighted the family was. The first tooth, the tooth of innocence, shining like a little white drop of milk, the milk tooth. There came one, There came several, a whole row, side by side, above and below, the loveliest child's teeth. And yet these were only the advanced troops, not the real ones that must last right through life. Then they too arrived, and the wisdom teeth as well, frugal men in the ranks, born in pain and great trouble. They leave you again, every one of them. They go before their period of service has run out. Even the last one goes, and that's no day of rejoicing. It's a day of sadness. And then you're old, even if your heart is young. Conversation and thoughts like that are hardly amusing, and yet we came to talk of all that. We came back to the years of childhood, talked and talked, and the clock struck 12 before Auntie retired to rest in the room next to mine. "Good night, my dear child," she called out. "Now I shall sleep as if I lay in my own chest of drawers." And she settled down to sleep in peace. But no peace was to be found either in the house or outside. The gale shook the windows, flogged the long dangling window catches, rang the neighbor's doorbell in the yard behind the house. The lodger overhead had come home. Once more he shook his little nightly stroll up and down. Then he flung his boots onto the floor and laid himself to rest. But his snoring is so loud that it could easily be heard through the ceiling. There was no rest or peace for me, and the weather didn't settle down either. It was abominably active. The wind whizzed and sang in its own way. My teeth also began to be active, and whizzed and sang in their own way. It was the signal for a full-dressed toothache. There was a draught from the window. The moon showed in across the floor. The glimmer came and went as the clouds came and went in the gale. There was a restless light and shadow, but at last the shadow on the floor began to look like something. I stared at this moving object, and I felt my blood run cold. On the floor sat a figure, long and thin, just as when a child draws with a pencil on its slate something resembling a person. A single thin stroke makes the body. Another and another are the arms. The legs are also each done in one stroke, and the head is a polygon. Presently the shape grew more distinct, wearing some sort of drapery, very thin and delicate, but this showed that it belonged to one of the female sex. I heard a droning sound. Was it her, or was it the wind humming like a hornet through the window crack? No, it was Madame Toothache herself, her infernal satanic frightfulness. Heaven preserve us from a visit from her. "It's good to be here," she droned. "This is a good neighborhood. Marshy, boggy ground. The mosquitoes have buzzed here with poison in their sting. Now I have the sting. It must be sharpened on human teeth. They're shining so white on this fellow in bed. They have defied sweet and sour, hot and cold, nutshells and plum stones. But I'll take them and shake them, nourish their roots with draughts, let the gold in their stumps." This was a terrible speech from a terrible visitor. "Dear, dear, so you're a poet, are you? Very well. I'll compose tortures for you in every meter. I'll give you iron and steel in your body, new fibers in all your nerves." I felt as if a red-hot gimlet was piercing my cheekbone. I writhed and squirmed. "Capital toothache," she said. "Quite an organ to play on. Concert on the Jew's harp. Magnificent, with trumpets and kettle drums, piccolos, and a trombone in the wisdom tooth. Great poet, great music." And she struck up, no doubt about that, and her appearance was frightful, even though you could hardly see more of her than her hand. The shadowy, ice-cold hand, with the long, skinny fingers. Each of them was an instrument of torture. Thumb and first finger had forceps and screw. The second finger ended as a sharp-pointed awl. The ring finger was a gimlet, and the little finger squirted mosquito poison. "I'll teach you metrics," she said. "A big poet must have a big toothache. A little poet, a little toothache." "Please let me be little," I begged. "Don't let me be anything. I'm no poet. I only have fits of writing, like fits of toothache. Do go away." "Will you admit, then, that I'm more powerful than poetry, philosophy, mathematics, and all music?" she asked. "More powerful than all those impressions in paint and in marble? I'm older than the whole lot of them. I was born near the Garden of Eden, just outside, where the wind blew and the damp toadstools were growing. I got Eve to wear clothes in the cold weather, and Adam too. Believe me, there was strength in the first toothache." "I believe everything you say," I replied, "but do go away." "Very well. If you will give up being a poet, never write down a single verse on paper, slate, or any other kind of writing material, then I'll leave you. But I shall come back if you start writing." "I swear," I answered. "All I ask is never to see you or meet you again." But you shall see me, only in an ampler form, one dearer to you than mine is at present. You shall see me as Auntie Millie, and I shall say, 'Right, my dear boy, you're a great poet, maybe the greatest we have. But believe me, if you start writing, I shall set your poems to music and play them on your Drew's harp, you darling child. Remember me when you see Auntie Millie." And she vanished. As a parting gift, I got a red-hot stab in the cheekbone, but it was soon lulled. I seemed to glide on smooth water and to see the white water lilies with their broad green leaves give way and sink beneath me, then wither and dissolve, and I sank with them and faded away in rest and peace. "I melt away like snow," came the sound of singing in the water. "Vanish in the clouds, sail away like the cloud." Down to me through the water came shining large luminous names inscribed upon floating banners of victory, the patent of immortality written on the mayfly's wings. I slept deeply, asleep without dreams. No longer I heard the whistling wind, the banging door, the clanging bell at the neighbor's entrance, nor the clumsy exercises of the lodger. How heavenly! Suddenly there came a gust, and the locked door in Auntie's room flew open. Auntie jumped up, slipped on clothes and shoes, and came in to see me. "I was sleeping like an angel," she said, and she hadn't the heart to wake me. I awoke of my own accord, opened my eyes, and had quite forgotten that Auntie was in the house. But then presently I remembered it, remembered my toothache apparition. Dream and reality became mingled together. "Suppose you didn't write something last night after we had said good night?" she asked. "If only you had. You are my poet, and you'll always be that." Her smile seemed to me so crafty. I wasn't sure whether it was the good-natured Auntie Millie who loved me, or the terrible one I had given my promise to last night. "Have you written anything, dear child?" No, I cried. "You are my Auntie Millie, aren't you?" "Who else?" she said, and it was Auntie Millie. She kissed me, got into a cab, and drove home. I wrote down what is written here. It's not in verse, and it shall never be printed. Well, that's where the manuscript stopped. My young friend, the future grocer's apprentice, couldn't lay his hands on the part that was missing. It had gone out in the world as paper to wrap up bloaters, butter, and green soap. It had fulfilled its destiny. The brewer is dead. Auntie is dead. The student is dead, the sparks of whose spirit went into the tub. That's the end of my story. The story of Auntie Toothache. The end.